They thought replacing you would erase the connection, but every new face only reminded them of what they lost. Watch till the end, because the truth about why they failed to replace you will change the way you see your own worth forever. They tried to replace you. It failed is not just a sentence, it is a revelation about value, presence, and the kind of impact that cannot be duplicated no matter how hard someone tries, because when you walked away or when circumstances separated you from their life, they convinced themselves that moving on would be simple, that filling your space would be easy, that finding someone who looked similar, talked similar, acted similar, or gave similar attention would erase the echo of your absence. But what they did not understand is that people are not positions to be refilled, souls are not roles to be recast, and energy cannot be photocopied like a document, because what you brought into their life was not just companionship, not just affection, not just presence, it was alignment, it was depth, it was an emotional frequency that matched theirs in ways they are only now beginning to comprehend. And so they tried to distract themselves with someone new, they tried to convince their friends that they were happier, they tried to post pictures, to smile harder, to speak louder about how better things were, but late at night when the noise faded and the performance ended, the silence reminded them of something uncomfortable. It doesn't feel the same, because the truth is that connection is not built on convenience but on resonance, and resonance cannot be forced. It either vibrates naturally or it doesn't, and what they had with you vibrated on a level they took for granted when it was easily accessible. They assumed you would always be there, always understanding, always forgiving, always patient, and when someone assumes permanence, they stop nurturing the present, and that is how they lost you, not in one dramatic explosion but in small overlooked moments, in words left unsaid, in efforts not made, in appreciation not shown, and when you finally chose yourself. When you stopped overextending, when you reclaimed your energy, they felt a void that pride initially refused to admit, so instead of reflecting, they replaced, because replacing feels easier than repairing, and ego prefers substitution over self-examination, but here is where reality intervened, because the person they chose after you could mimic your habits but not your heart, could offer attention but not authenticity, could provide company but not connection, and slowly the cracks began to show. Conversations felt surface level, laughter felt lighter, disagreements felt heavier, and the depth they once complained about with you became the depth they desperately missed, because what they once labeled as too much was actually too real, and reality is confronting, it requires growth, it demands accountability, and not everyone is ready for that, so they thought someone simpler would be better, someone less intense, someone less intuitive, someone who would not see through them the way you did. But simplicity without substance eventually becomes boredom. And validation without vulnerability eventually becomes emptiness, and now they sit in a situation that looks acceptable from the outside but feels hollow on the inside, and the comparison they swore they would never make happens automatically, because memory does not erase quality, it preserves it, and every time something falls short, your absence becomes louder, not because you are perfect, but because you were genuine. And genuineness is rare in a world full of curated personalities and temporary attachments. And they are starting to realize that what they lost was not just a partner but a mirror, someone who reflected their potential back to them, someone who challenged them to grow, someone who loved them in a way that felt both safe and transformative, and transformation is uncomfortable but necessary, and instead of embracing that journey with you, they chose comfort, they chose distraction, they chose the illusion of ease. And illusions always expire, because sooner or later the truth surfaces, and the truth is that compatibility is not about replacing faces but about aligning souls, and no matter how many new conversations they start, none carry the same undertone, no matter how many new hands they hold, none fit the same way, no matter how many new compliments they receive, none land with the same sincerity, because you did not just say things, you meant them, you did not just show up physically, you showed up emotionally, and emotional availability is not common, it is a gift, and gifts are often undervalued until they are gone, and now hindsight is teaching them what humility refused to learn earlier, that you were not easily replaceable because you were not generic, you were specific, your humor, your perspective, your way of understanding their silence without explanation, your ability to sense shifts in their mood before they spoke, these are not traits that can be ordered on demand. They are cultivated through genuine connection, and genuine connection takes time, effort, and emotional risk, and while they were busy trying to prove they could move on effortlessly, life was quietly proving that depth cannot be substituted with novelty, because novelty excites temporarily but depth sustains long-term, and sustainability is what they truly crave even if they once claimed otherwise, and now they are confronted with the difference between attention and intention. Because attention is easy to find but intention is rare, and you had intention, you were intentional about conversations, about future plans, about emotional safety, about growth, and intention creates security, and security builds trust, and trust forms attachment that is not easily broken, and that is why replacing you feels like wearing shoes that almost fit but always leave a discomfort that cannot be ignored, and they may not admit this publicly, they may not message you immediately, they may not confess regret out loud, but internally the awareness is growing, because experience is the greatest teacher, and experience with someone new is highlighting the irreplaceable aspects of you, and this is not about ego or revenge or proving superiority, this is about understanding value, because sometimes people only recognize the quality of what they had after testing alternatives that fail to measure up, and while they are navigating that realization, you are evolving. You are rediscovering yourself outside of their shadow, you are strengthening boundaries, refining standards, and elevating expectations, and growth changes energy, and when energy changes, dynamics shift permanently, and even if they circle back with nostalgia and newfound appreciation, you are no longer the same version they left, because pain either hardens or enlightens, and you chose enlightenment, you chose to transform hurt into wisdom, and wisdom does not settle for being a backup option. Wisdom does not compete for a position it once held effortlessly, wisdom understands that being replaced is sometimes the greatest confirmation of uniqueness, because failed replacements are evidence that what you offered was authentic, and authenticity cannot be mass-produced, and now the lesson stands clear. They tried to replace you, but the universe does not allow duplicates of original souls, and what they are truly mourning is not just your absence but the realization that they underestimated a connection that was rare. And rarity is only understood through loss, and loss has a way of stripping away ego and exposing truth, and the truth is simple yet powerful. You were never just another option, you were alignment, you were depth, you were growth, and growth is not convenient but it is unforgettable, and unforgettable people are not replaced, they are remembered, compared to, learned from, and often regretted, and while they navigate the consequences of their choices, you continue forward with the quiet confidence of someone who knows their worth does not decrease simply because someone failed to recognize it in time, because value is inherent, not dependent on acknowledgement, and the failure to replace you is not a coincidence, it is a reflection of the fact that when something is real, it leaves an imprint, and imprints do not fade just because someone wishes them to, and so the story is not about rejection, it is about realization. It is about understanding that some connections are lessons while others are once-in-a-lifetime alignments, and they are. Slowly realizing which category you belong to, and by the time that understanding fully settles in, you will already be far ahead, stronger, wiser, and aligned with something that does not attempt to replace but chooses to appreciate, because the greatest power you hold is not in being missed, it is in being irreplaceable, and irreplaceable does not mean perfect, it means authentic, it means aligned, it means deeply connected in a way that cannot be artificially recreated, and that is why. Despite every attempt, every distraction, every substitution, every rebound, every forced smile, every comparison denied but secretly made, the conclusion remains unchanged. They tried to replace you. It failed, and what hurts them the most is not just that it failed, but that it failed quietly, without drama, without announcement, without anyone needing to point it out, because failure in this situation is subtle. It shows up in the pauses during conversations that are supposed to feel exciting, it shows up in the way their eyes wander when they are being spoken to, it shows up in the strange emotional distance they cannot explain even when everything on paper seems fine, and the more they try to convince themselves that this new chapter is better, the more they feel the contrast between surface compatibility and soul compatibility, because with you there was an unspoken rhythm. A natural understanding that did not require over-explaining, a comfort that did not need to be performed, and now they are realizing how rare that rhythm actually was, because chemistry can be manufactured for a moment but harmony is either there or it is not, and harmony is what they lost when they lost you, and instead of grieving it properly, they attempted to overwrite it. But emotional connections are not files you can simply delete and replace, they are etched into memory through shared vulnerability, shared struggles, shared growth, and those layers cannot be rebuilt overnight. With someone new, no matter how attractive, how available, or how convenient that person may be, because convenience fades when depth is missing, and depth is what you brought effortlessly, not by trying to impress but by being fully yourself, and authenticity creates an imprint that lingers long after presence is gone, and now they find themselves comparing in ways they once swore they would not, noticing how conversations lack meaning, how support feels conditional, how laughter feels rehearsed instead of spontaneous, and comparison is not something they are proud of, but it happens automatically when the heart has experienced something real before, because once you taste sincerity, imitation becomes obvious, and they are beginning to see that what they thought was replaceable was actually foundational, because you were not just filling time in their life, you were influencing perspective, encouraging growth, challenging limitations, and pushing them toward a version of themselves that required maturity, and maturity is uncomfortable, and that discomfort is what they ran from, believing that someone else would offer ease without accountability, but ease without accountability leads to stagnation, and stagnation creates dissatisfaction, and dissatisfaction leads to reflection, and reflection brings them back to the uncomfortable truth that they let go of someone who was aligned with their evolution, not just their ego. And ego seeks validation while evolution seeks transformation, and you were about transformation, which is why being with you felt intense at times, because intensity is what growth feels like before it becomes strength, and instead of embracing that intensity, they mistook it for incompatibility, not realizing that discomfort was simply the stretching of old patterns breaking apart, and now in a calmer but shallower connection, they feel safe but uninspired, accompanied but unseen, desired but not deeply understood, and that difference is impossible to ignore once awareness begins to rise, and awareness is a slow but unstoppable force, because once someone recognizes what they lost, they cannot unknow it, they cannot go back to the illusion that anyone can simply step into your place and recreate the same dynamic, because dynamics are built from two specific energies interacting in a specific way at a specific time, and when one of those energies is removed, the equation changes permanently, and no substitute can restore the original formula, and the more they try to deny this internally, the louder their intuition becomes, reminding them of your patience during their worst moods, your belief in them when they doubted themselves, your consistency when they were inconsistent, and those memories are not romanticized fantasies, they are emotional benchmarks, and once a benchmark is set high, mediocrity becomes difficult to tolerate. And that is the silent struggle they are facing now, because they wanted to prove they did not need you, but what they are discovering is that needing someone is not weakness when that need is rooted in mutual growth and genuine connection, and pride prevented them from admitting your value when they had direct access to it, and now humility is teaching them through absence, and absence is a powerful teacher because it removes comfort and leaves only truth. And the truth is that some people enter your life not to be temporary entertainment but to shift your entire emotional landscape, and you were that shift for them, which is why nothing feels quite as impactful now, and while they are wrestling with this internal realization, you are stepping further into your own clarity, understanding that being irreplaceable is not about being chased, it is about being authentic to the point that no imitation can compete, and authenticity creates standards, and standards eliminate confusion. And the confusion they once had about you is now replaced with clarity about what they lost, and clarity often arrives too late, because timing matters, and growth that is delayed can cost opportunities that never return, and they may attempt to reconnect at some point, not necessarily because the new person failed completely, but because the comparison exposed something undeniable, that what they had with you was rare, layered, meaningful, and transformative, and transformation cannot be found in places designed only for distraction. And distraction is what they chose initially, but distraction eventually exhausts itself, leaving behind the original void they tried to escape, and that void carries your name not because you were perfect, but because you were real, and real connections leave echoes, and echoes remind people of truths they once ignored, and the more life unfolds for them, the more they will recognize that replacing you was never truly possible, because you were not a temporary chapter, you were a turning point, and turning points cannot be recreated. They can only be remembered, learned from, and sometimes deeply regretted, and the quiet realization settling into their heart now is heavier than any argument you ever had, heavier than any prideful decision they once justified, because now it is not about proving strength, it is about facing truth, and the truth stands steady and undeniable. They tried to replace you, and every attempt only revealed how singular, how specific, and how irreplaceable you truly are. And the most unsettling part for them now is recognizing that the failure was never about the new person being inadequate, it was about the connection lacking the depth that only existed with you, because when something is divinely aligned it carries a weight, a gravity that pulls two souls toward growth whether they feel ready or not, and they mistook that gravity for pressure, they mistook that depth for difficulty, they mistook your emotional awareness for intensity, not realizing that intensity is often the birthplace of transformation, and transformation requires courage. And courage was the one thing they avoided when they chose replacement over reflection, because reflection forces accountability and accountability challenges ego, and ego prefers to believe that options are endless and attachments are interchangeable. But reality has a way of dismantling that illusion slowly and methodically, because as time moves forward and novelty fades, substance becomes the only thing that matters. And substance is what you embodied without effort, you were not trying to compete, you were not performing for validation, you were simply present in a way that demanded authenticity in return. And authenticity can feel confronting to someone who is still learning how to face themselves, and so instead of rising to meet your depth, they stepped sideways into something that felt lighter, something that required less vulnerability, something that did not expose their insecurities so clearly. But what feels lighter at first can eventually feel empty, and emptiness echoes louder than confrontation ever did, because confrontation at least carries the promise of growth, while emptiness carries only the repetition of routine without evolution, and now they find themselves in patterns that feel safe but stagnant, calm but colorless, stable but uninspiring, and it is in these quiet moments of comparison that your absence becomes more than memory, it becomes realization. Because they are beginning to understand that what they once saw as replaceable was actually rare. Alignment, and alignment is not about shared hobbies or mutual attraction alone, it is about two people challenging each other to expand beyond comfort zones, to question limiting beliefs, to confront fears that would otherwise remain hidden, and you did that for them simply by being who you are. You held up a mirror that reflected both their potential and their shortcomings. And mirrors can feel harsh when someone is not ready to see clearly, so instead of looking deeper, they walked away, convincing themselves that a different reflection would feel better, but reflections do not change reality, they only reveal it, and now the absence of that mirror is forcing them to recognize what it once showed, because without you there to challenge them, growth has slowed, self-awareness has dulled, and the emotional spark that once pushed them to become more has dimmed into something predictable. And predictability is comfortable, but it rarely inspires greatness, and deep down they know. They experienced something with you that was not common, something that shifted them in ways they did not fully appreciate at the time, because appreciation often arrives through loss, and loss strips away pride, excuses, and narratives we build to protect ourselves, leaving behind the simple truth that some connections are not meant to be swapped out like accessories, they are meant to be honored, nurtured, and protected. And in trying to prove independence or superiority, they sacrificed something that was quietly extraordinary, and now the echo of that sacrifice lingers in their thoughts, in random memories triggered by songs, by places, by phrases that remind them of how effortlessly conversations flowed between you, how even disagreements carried understanding underneath them, how silence felt peaceful rather than awkward, and that kind of emotional safety is not easily recreated. Because safety is built through consistency and trust over time, and trust is not transferable from one person to another simply because circumstances change, and the deeper realization settling into their heart is that replacing you was an attempt to bypass grief, to skip the discomfort of acknowledging your value, to outrun the lesson that your absence was trying to teach them. But lessons do not disappear when ignored, they repeat until understood, and the lesson here is about recognizing uniqueness. About understanding that certain souls enter our lives not to be placeholders but to awaken parts of us that remain dormant otherwise, and you awaken something within them, something they may not even have words for yet, but they feel its absence clearly now, because what you brought into their world altered it permanently, and permanent shifts cannot be undone by temporary distractions, and the more they try to immerse themselves in this new dynamic, the more subtle comparisons rise. Not because they want to dwell on the past, but because the heart remembers alignment even when the mind tries to rationalize it away, and that memory creates a quiet internal conflict, because admitting that they lost something irreplaceable requires humility, and humility is often born through failure, and this failed replacement is teaching them more about your worth than any argument ever could, because experiences speak louder than explanations, and every moment that feels slightly off, slightly shallow, slightly disconnected reinforces the truth that what they had with you was layered and profound. And while they navigate this awakening, you are no longer waiting in the same emotional space, because growth did not stop for you. You turned pain into clarity, confusion into boundaries, attachment into self-respect, and that evolution has elevated you beyond the version of yourself they once knew, which means that even if realization pushes them toward you again, they will not be meeting the same person they walked away from. They will be facing someone stronger, more grounded, more aware of their value, and value once recognized internally no longer seeks external validation, and that is the final shift in this story, because the failure to replace you is not about them losing comfort, it is about them recognizing depth too late, and depth is not something you can recreate on demand, it is something you build through authenticity and mutual growth, and what you shared was built, layer by layer, moment by moment, through honesty, vulnerability, and emotional courage, and those layers cannot simply be transferred onto someone else, no matter how much they wish it were possible, because connection is chemistry mixed with timing, growth, and alignment, and when those elements converge uniquely between two people, the result is not easily duplicated, and that is why despite their efforts, despite new beginnings, despite forced optimism, the conclusion continues to surface in quiet, undeniable ways. They tried to replace you, and in doing so they discovered that some people are not replaceable at all, they are singular experiences that redefine what connection means, and once that definition is rewritten, nothing less will ever feel enough again.